Find other great podcasts like this one at podmoth.network.
In a world filled with mysteries, where the unknown lurks in the shadows, two intrepid hosts dare to uncover the truth. Join Glenn and Oma on a journey into the realm of caffeinated conspiracies, now a part of the Podmoth Network.
Hey, I'm Glenn.
And I'm Oma.
Together, we explore the unexplained, from ancient legends to modern-day enigmas.
Join us as we delve into the depths of conspiracy theories, paranormal phenomena, and everything in between.
With a blend of curiosity, laughter, and a dash of caffeine, they'll take you on a wild ride through the mysteries of the universe.
So grab your favorite brew, sit back, and let's uncover the truth together.
Because truth, like coffee, is best served bold.
Caffeinated Conspiracies. Get ready to awaken your mind.
Spectres wait. In darkened corners, faces dove white in the fading evening, glistening in their translucency. As the living world settles off to slumber, long, delicate fingers are reaching fog, seeking stasis, intertwined with something no longer aware of their existence. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to another episode of the Identity Podcast on the Podmoth Media Network, your foray into the weird, wonky, and sometimes downright spooky. This week, I present listener stories from Redditors that were forwarded to me, and some submissions. I hope you enjoy these spooky tidbits, and I hope you'll join me again for a future episode. And now, on with the show. Adrian, New Mexico. Redditor, Gemini Love CA. When I was still newly married, my then-husband and I moved into a new townhouse-style apartment. The 2 floors of the apartment were on the 2nd and 3rd floors of the building, and the management office and mailbox area were almost directly below us on the ground level. The woman who managed the building was older, didn't care for the property well, and usually spent most days chain-smoking Camel non-filters in her office and being a hateful old racist. Imagine renting a place from Juno the social worker from Beetlejuice, but less helpful. She really resented that we had the townhouse, claiming that we lied about my being pregnant when we moved in because she didn't want to rent that unit to people with kids. She also made a few disparaging remarks about my husband due to his race. So after kiddo was born, I was a stay-at-home mom, just busy keeping the house clean and the baby occupied without a car or local mom friends. After lunch, kiddo needed a bath. Anyone with a 9-month-old baby knows that messes can happen, so I went upstairs and ran the tub. Soon I had the baby sitting happily, splashing in one of those suction cup bath seats. Important to note is it's the middle of the winter, and we had no heat, an issue that I'd been fighting Juno the landlord about for a while, among other maintenance issues, like my arcing ceiling fan, or the garbage disposal that was held on with duct tape and leaked. We basically had to keep a space heater, or 2, in every room to keep the chill off. I'd taken one of the space heaters into the bathroom to keep the bathroom warm enough for bath time, and had it sitting out of reach and splashing distance on top of the bathroom counter. I was standing in the bathtub getting ready to lift the baby out when all of a sudden the space heater started to rock back and forth, when it had not been rocking before. I had this horrible feeling of dread as I looked at the heater, and I just reacted because I knew I couldn't get us both out of the bathtub in time. I reached down to grab the baby seat, ending up pulling it out of the tub and dropping the baby over the side of the tub onto the bathroom floor, just as the heater got to the end of its cord. It thumped into the shower door, bounced off the edge of the tub, and landed on its side on the floor a few inches away, where it shut off. When I looked over to the corner of the bathroom, that part of the room seemed to just get darker. It was filling up with shadows. There was no smoke, no change in lighting, no windows. It was just darker. I also started to smell cigarette smoke. Camel non-filters, which I knew the smell well from being in Juno's office all the time to get things fixed. The smell was so thick that it made me cough and it made my chest ache. But I couldn't see any smoke haze. I felt this overwhelming sensation of hatred and malice, like somebody was standing there giving me a death glare. I grabbed the baby and a towel and ran downstairs. I was so freaked out I couldn't bring myself to go back up there, so I used some diapers from the diaper bag and kept the baby wrapped in a towel and cuddled up to stay warm. I stayed down there the entire rest of the day until my husband got home. Every so often, I'd look up the stairs to the bathroom, but I didn't want to take the baby up there, and I was afraid to leave him alone downstairs. When he asked me why the baby wasn't dressed, I told him about the heater and the smoke in the bathroom, and he went to check, figuring it was yet another maintenance issue. There were no electrical issues, no damage to the outlet, no smoke, no cigarette smell. He put the heater back on the counter and turned it on, watched it for a few minutes, and it didn't rock. So, it didn't rock itself off the counter earlier. He laughed it off, but later that day we heard Juno's adult son downstairs near the mailboxes yelling, and that's when we found out that she'd had a massive heart attack in her office earlier that day, and he'd found her dead in her chair, with a Camel non-filtered still in her hand. Douglas, Texas. When I was little, my dad left us, and my mom worked the late shift. My little brother and I, he was 7 at the time and I was 11, were expected to come home from school at 3:30 p.m. I was expected to heat up food for the both of us for dinner, and we were to be in bed before Mom came home around 11. She'd see us off to the bus stop in the morning, but beyond that, we didn't see much of one another. We were what was called latchkey kids. We came home, locked the door behind us, and went about our lives in our apartment. We were explicitly told not to answer the door or the phone, and to keep the drapes pulled closed. Mom said, "Pretend like you're invisible." She couldn't afford childcare, so that was how we lived. One night as I was brushing my teeth getting ready to go to bed, I thought I heard a faint knocking on the apartment door. The door faced the outside where there was a walkway between the buildings. Each building had a dozen or so apartments in it, but at this time of night, around 9, not many people were home, as a lot of our neighbors also worked second or third. I tiptoed to the locked front door and put my ear against it. I waited a few seconds, but I didn't hear anything outside. I figured either someone got confused about an apartment number and figured it out, or maybe it was an animal of some sort. Either way, it didn't seem like there was anything happening outside, so I turned off the light in the living room, leaving a light on over the stove for my mother, checked on my brother, who was fast asleep, and went and got in bed. In no time, I was asleep myself. I woke up to what I knew was the sound of our door opening. The clock by my bed read 9:45, so I knew it wasn't my mom. She never came home early as she couldn't afford to, and if she was going to, she'd call the house, so we wouldn't be startled. I went to my bedroom door and opened it as quietly as I could. I didn't see anything or hear anything else. After what seemed like ages, but was probably only a couple of minutes, I felt brave enough to leave my room. In the living room, there was no one, but the front door, the one that I had made sure was locked tight, was wide open. I rushed to the door and closed it, locking it and putting on the chain. Our apartment was small, so a glance around told me that there was nobody inside who shouldn't be. I checked on my brother, who was still asleep, and got back into bed. I laid awake for a while listening to the sounds of random cars outside and the usual bug noises, but eventually I fell back to sleep. I wasn't asleep long before I woke up to my little brother shaking me. He told me that someone was in the apartment and he was frightened. I asked him where he saw the person, and he said that they were standing at the front door. I told him that he must have had a bad dream, but I left him in the room to go and check. When I got to the end of the hall, I felt a breeze coming through that could only be there if the front door was open. When I peeked around the corner, there was no one, again, but the front door was wide open. I went and quickly closed it and locked it, thinking that there must be something wrong with the lock. But I'd put the chain on too, so I was confused how that could happen. When I turned around in the far corner of the living room, I noticed that it was very dark. It kind of looked like smoke, but I couldn't smell anything burning. The corner got darker and darker despite the light from the kitchen, and it started to take shape. I was terrified. I ran back to my room and closed and locked the door, and my brother and I sat with our backs against it until my mother came home at her usual time. It took my mother several hours to calm us down. To this day, almost 40 years later, I still have no explanation for that night. We moved out of that apartment a couple of years later, but in that time we had similar experiences that I have no explanation for. Sometimes the mass was just really, really dark and billowed like smoke. Sometimes it took the shape of a very tall man, sometimes as tall as 6 feet. My mother had a local pastor come over to say a blessing and clear out any negative energy, but it didn't help. After the first night, my brother and I started sleeping in the same room, on blankets that were piled up by the locked door. My mother asked the landlord to come up and replace the lock, saying that it was faulty, and it never opened itself again, so maybe that was the issue. But we'd still see the dark mass in the living room, and I still don't know why. Deborah, Wisconsin. Redditor Majora420. Something invited itself into my friend's home. I've told this story on another subreddit, but this is one haunting experience that really freaked me out. When I was younger, I had a next-door neighbor named Lexi, and she was my best friend. Our parents would go on trips on motorcycles with each other, and we would camp out at one of our houses until they came back. It was normal for us, and we never had any paranormal events prior to this specific night. We were sitting in the bedroom talking and doing what we normally did. We saw a bright light through her window, followed by the sounds of motorcycles pulling into the gravel driveway. We instantly think, okay, our parents forgot something. But before we could even get up to leave the bedroom, we heard a knock and a soft woman's voice say, "Hello?" The front door opened. This was a familiar sound because the door scraped against the hardwood flooring. We panicked, thinking that there was an intruder at this point because the woman didn't sound like our family. We scouted the house, scared out of our minds, just to find the front door wide open and nobody in the driveway. Nobody was in the house. We finally felt better. We walked back into her bedroom, but before she went to enter, she collapsed onto the floor and started sobbing. I didn't know what was happening. I was scared, and she told me that something as tall as the door frame was standing in her parents' room. After our parents returned, her family continued to have paranormal activity in their house. Renee, Arkansas. As a kid, I lived with a mishmash of extended family in a rural part of Arkansas. For the most part, things were peaceful. We grew a lot of our own food, we kept chickens and pigs. In the morning before school, my cousins and I, one lived down the road a ways and the other lived with us, had chores so we'd go to take care of the animals while my mom made breakfast. On our property, it was an acre at least, there was an old house. It wasn't totally sound, so we couldn't live in there, and it needed to be torn down. We weren't supposed to go in for this reason, but we of course spent time in there anyway. It did have a bit of a creepy feeling about it, but I kind of liked that vibe as a kid. We'd go in there and hang out and tell creepy stories. It wasn't until much later in my life that I found out what actually happened there from my mother. In the 1960s, my grandparents lived in that house. My grandfather built it with the help of a friend. It took them 9 weeks to complete, and the place was my grandmother's pride and joy. But since my grandfather put the foundation in place, there was always a sense that something was off. No matter where you went inside or around the house, You felt like eyes were following you, and any room you entered gave you a feeling that you were intruding on something else, like you weren't supposed to be there. One year the well on the property dried up, so my grandfather had to pay somebody to come in and drill a new one. He was told it would take a few days, but the ground was soft, so it should be easy going. The day the guy came out to do the work, my grandfather ran to the store for pump parts, and my grandmother and mother were just there going about their business. The guy set up the equipment and started work. About an hour later, he knocked on the door and he asked for my grandmother to come out. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. When my grandmother went to the drill site, my mother tagging along behind, she found pieces of broken wood everywhere. She asked where they'd come from, and the guy said that he was doing the work and all of a sudden the drill jammed up. The cause was all the wood scattered around. In the dirt around the hole, there were pieces of bone. My mother, who had told me she remembers this vividly, even though she was only 6 years old, said that she saw pieces of a human skull. My grandparents learned that the house that they built was close to an old cemetery. They found the stones scattered in the woods a year or so later. They drilled somewhere else for the well. I'm not sure what happened when they saw the bones, if they called the police or if they just assumed that they were animal bones. But to this day, my mother swears that they were human. Brock, Maine. In my late teens, I worked as a housekeeper at a roadside motel. It was kind of shady and the owner was a creep, but the pay wasn't too bad and I got decent tips from the guests during the busy season. One night as I was clearing out a bunch of trash from one of the rooms towards the back of the motel, the phone rang. I picked it up and it was my boss on the other end of a crackly connection, asking me to check under the mattress for a lost wallet. I said fine, hung up the phone and checked. Sure enough, there was a wallet. It was brown leather and very thick with a lot of money and cards inside it. I brought the wallet to the front desk and handed it to my boss. I said it was right where he said it was. He looked at me like I was crazy. He said he didn't call. I was sure it was him on the phone. He had kind of a unique voice. He insisted it wasn't him. I watched him pull the driver's license out and put the wallet and its contents in the safe. He was the only person who had the safe combo. He said that he'd check the logs and he'd get it back to the person. I went back to work. Back in the room, I finished cleaning the bathroom, vacuuming, and resetting the soap and drinking glasses on their little tray by the sink. I then set to the task of making the bed. I stripped the old sheets, tugging off the fitted sheet, and I heard something fall to the floor. I looked, and it was a wallet. Brown leather and packed with cash. I thought I was going nuts. I again took the wallet to the main office, feeling like I was being punked, and set the wallet on the counter. My boss looked up and was visibly confused. He asked me why I took the wallet out of the safe and was angry. I said, I don't have the combo to the safe. You know that, and I saw you lock it. This is a different wallet. He looked at it and opened it up to check the ID. The card he pulled out had the same name and photo on it. He screwed up his face and turned to open the safe. When he did, there was nothing inside. I have no explanation of how that happened. I worked at that motel for around 3 years, and I never had that happen again, though I would occasionally stock a room with fresh towels from my cart, only to come back to the room a few minutes later and find the towel rack totally empty. That's it for this episode, dear listeners. Tune in next time for more tales of the creepy, weird, and paranormal. Until then, stay spooky. Find the Odd Pod on Instagram at IdentityPod or on Facebook as the Identity Podcast. Also, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review and share this episode with a friend. Be sure to mash that subscribe button so that you're in the know when a new episode drops.